Good morning, it's Cassim. Welcome back again. I hope you're well. Well, I say it's good morning. It might not be good morning to you. It might be good afternoon or it might be evening. You might be seeing this at 3 a.m. in the morning. But welcome back again anyway. I wanted to talk in this video about what fathers teach you without saying a word. So let me give you some context. A couple of days ago, I was watching a video on YouTube about group therapy. Many of you who've listened to me before will know that I've been training to become a psychotherapist, and over the last year and a half I've been doing research and writing a book about why it is that boys and men don't come to therapy and why it is that when they come to therapy they don't stay. And in doing research for that book, one of the things that I found can help men come to therapy and is a really effective way of helping men is group therapy. So I've been doing a lot of research on group therapy, on dynamics, on what training I myself am going to have in order to run a group therapy session after I qualify, the dynamics of a group therapy, how they work, how do you set boundaries, how do you protect different people in the group. And whilst I was listening to this man, he was doing an interview at a university and he got asked about, let me remember correctly what he was being asked about. I can't remember exactly what he was being asked about, but he ended up talking about, they were asking him about how he came up with one of his approaches to group therapy. And he said that he had spent about 4 years every single week going to psychoanalysis and going to counseling over 4 years. And all of that time he had a supervisor he had a counselor, and his counselor would just simply listen to him and validate him, and that was it. There was not, the counselor never did what's called disclosure. The counselor never shared any aspects of who they were. They never established a relationship which was collaborative. Let me give you context, by the way. In terms of counseling, many counselors do not like disclosing information about themselves. So if you say to them, do you have kids? Or you ask them about, have they ever had depression or anything like that? Many counselors are reluctant to ever disclose anything like that because they feel like, well, if I open this up, this is not for everybody, but some do. They feel like if I open this up and I start talking about this, then the client might start asking me about this and this and this and this, dot, 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 dot. So that's one of the reasons why counselors don't like talking about it. But he said that even though he had spent all those hours in therapy, the biggest lesson that he took away from all of those hours is that that type of therapy doesn't work. Just simply listening to somebody and paraphrasing and reflecting back to them what they know, what they've just shared to you, what you've heard them say, isn't effective. It doesn't move the client forward anyhow. And he said it took all of those 4 years of therapy every single week for him to learn that, which is why it got me thinking about dads, because I've been really recently very interested in fathers and family dynamics, and you hear me talk a lot about them anyway in these reflections as you hear me share. And I was thinking about what things fathers teach children, in particular boys, that they don't end up having to say. And I thought that I would share some of my reflections and some of the things that I wrote down here. Maybe you might find them useful, maybe you might not. Who knows? It'd be actually quite interesting to hear what your thoughts are on this. So comment below, send me a message, all the usual stuff. I'm always interested to have a conversation with you guys. Okay, so first let's begin off with this. The first thing that I wrote down here is, and it's linked actually to that first point, to that story that I've just told you just a moment ago, is that what you want to be and what you don't want to be. When I've been growing up, I've heard many people talk about their families, and they've said, well, my mum and my dad divorced and therefore I will never get married. I've heard people say, I've grown up in a narcissistic family and consequently I can't trust anybody. My father wasn't around for me, therefore all fathers are liars, cheaters. I grew up in a domestic abuse household, and I saw the way my dad treated my mum, treated other family members, treated me, and consequently I don't ever want to become that. Or some people go through the same divorce and they say, because my father was like this, consequently, I now know what I want to be. And in fact, on this, your father also inadvertently will teach you that, oh, I love that. I love the fact that my dad used to open the door. I love the relationship that my dad and my mum had. I love the fact that my dad bought my mum flowers every single Friday for 20 years. I love the fact that my dad was always a good listener. I love the way that my dad was always so compassionate. What I've observed is when you have a father, or you don't have a father, or you have a good father, or you have a father that's got a lot of high traits of narcissism, or he's got a mental illness, it teaches you a lot. It's so interesting how part of the reason why I ended up coming into psychotherapy and ended up doing this, being somebody who's very interested in people, is because when my biological dad died when I was 7 years of age, if I remember correctly. And after my mum got pregnant at a very young age, and after my mum got pregnant at age 16, she went and told my biological dad, and my biological dad said he didn't want anything to do with my mum. And I've been so interested as to why a father could have a child and then consequently not want to be in the child's life. And then my stepdad, who is a white man, who converted from Christianity to Islam in order to marry my mum, I was always interested in, why would you then take care of a child who isn't yours, right? Now, ironically, and this is something that I've had to reflect on for myself, is that what I have learned is that even though you can be almost a surrogate father or a stepdad or whatever word that you want to put on it, inherently children know that you're not their dad. And in my particular situation, I grew up in my family and I knew I was always loved and cared for, but I never felt like I belonged in my family. And I'm going to come back to that point in a second because it's really important. But my point being is that when I was growing up in my family, I grew up and I was really asking questions, because I was like, why? And I had comparisons, and I was like, oh, I'm going to have to choose, because my biological dad had me and he didn't want me there, whereas you've got this stepdad who never chose me, but life happened and he ended up with me. But he looked after me, he came to me with football, he came to plays, he bought me clothes, he bought me food, he allowed me to live in his house, all of this sort of stuff. And I came to the conclusion, like, man, okay, so it seems that there are certain aspects of each one of these men that I like or don't like, and now I have to make a choice about who I want to become. Which leads me to one of the points here, which I wrote down, which is that your father will, or biological dad will inevitably teach you whether you have choice or not. And my observation has been that there are some family dynamics and family systems where you grow up in them and you cannot be who you want to be. I've talked a little bit about this, actually, I think in previous videos, where I've talked about unhealthy family systems. In unhealthy family systems, the dynamics work in such a way that the children's roles in the family are not dependent on their leanings and what they want to become. They're dependent on maintaining one person, particularly if that person have really high narcissistic traits, or that person comes from needs a certain framework, like a religious framework. And again, I've talked a little bit about this, and I've said before that my observation has been that certain people are drawn to certain psychological frameworks. Some people are drawn to being atheists. Some people are drawn to Islam. Some people are drawn to Christianity, because if you listen to people who are drawn to Christianity, these people usually have suffered a lot. They'll usually be lacking a sense of belonging. They would have made a lot of mistakes and want to be redeemed. In fact, you can see it in the language. When you read the Bible, a lot of it is to do with redeeming, forgiveness, sacrifice, being loved, and consequently, you know, if you get somebody who is really a spiritual person, a very creative person, that person is going to gravitate towards Buddhism, right? They're gonna, if you get somebody who's very much into the somatic, into understanding how the physiology of the body works and sees the world from that psychological framework, they're going to be drawn to Buddhism, because there is a lot of somatic stuff. There is a lot of body. There's a lot of things to do with karma, acupuncture. All of that sort of stuff is very much in that Eastern philosophy. What was I saying now? And so when you grow up in a household where a parent or a father needs a psychological framework in order to operate, which is what I learned about my stepdad. You see, when I was growing up, then what ends up, I'm going to come back to that. If you grow up in a family where somebody needs a psychological framework, what will end up happening is that either everybody in the family has to move to them, or they will destroy the entire family, or the family has to move and leave them behind. So in my particular case, what I learned from my stepdad is that my stepdad grew up in such a family that he needed Islam. Islam is very rigidified, it's very set, there is no ambiguity, it's very defined, and consequently what ended up happening for me, which is, and this is quite interesting, because I grew up in so much polarity and so much difference, meaning that my biological dad didn't want me, but my stepdad wanted me. I grew up in Africa for a part of my life, and grew up in the African culture, but then I grew up in England and saw that culture. My stepdad was a Muslim, but his family were Christians. I grew up in a council estate, but all my friends came from wealthy neighborhoods and lived in wealthy neighborhoods, and the school that I went to was in a wealthy neighborhood. I grew up in a household where my family, my parents had a lot of kids, whereas a lot of my friends had very few siblings. And so what ended up happening for me, oh, hold on a minute, let me just touch this a minute. I think someone's calling me. So what ended up happening for me is that I saw a lot of polarity and I had to basically decide. Whereas a lot of people grow up in a family where your decisions are made for you. And in my particular case, what ended up happening was that because I grew up in a household, and I'm talking about my sexuality now, because I grew up in a household where sexuality was so rigidified and so set, it meant that I had to hide a lot of who I was. Because I'm such an open-minded person, because I'm so curious, Islam doesn't allow for curiosity, right? Most religions do not allow for curiosity. They do not allow for asking questions. You have to be obedient. You know, if you listen to a lot of religious texts and you listen to what they talk about, there is a lot of talk about obedience, following, being submissive, and I don't like any of those. Because when I was growing up in my household, what I saw was my mum was always a victim to her circumstances. She had a child at a very young age, which meant that she could never become what she wanted to become. I remember her always asking money from my stepdad, but my stepdad would always say that we don't have the money. So I learned that, okay, so you can control, the person who has money can control other people. And so consequently, I didn't ever want to be in situations where I was controlled or where I didn't have choice or where I couldn't be what I wanted to be. Does this make sense? Sorry, this is like quite complicated because I'm reflecting on it as I'm saying it to you as well. And so for me, what I've observed is that your father will inevitably teach you whether you have choices or not. If you have a father who is an alcoholic, or who is into football, you will tend to see that that will determine whether you're loved or not. In fact, one of the things that I wrote down here is that if you are different or not. And part of your father will inevitably show you whether you're different or not. And the more fundamentalist and more strong the father is on where he stands, on how the world is, on what he believes, the less you can be who you want to be. And what I mean by that, bear with me 2 seconds. And what I mean by that is that if you've got a father who is absolutely adamant there is one team that is the best team in the world, that there is only one career, you either have to become a doctor, lawyer, accountant, or you're a failure, that you either have to have, if you get a father who's like got black and white thinking, you either are the person who is the dominant one or you're the weak one. You're either the one in charge or the one who is being overpowered, or the one who's being submissive. If you get a father who has that sort of thinking and there is no nuance and there is no room to explore, what ends up happening is that you don't end up feeling that you belong, feeling that you fit, feeling that you know where you're at. But ironically, and this is where it gets complicated, because for some kids, they need that certainty. They need that kind of parent who's going to tell them what to do, who to be. But I guess for me, what ended up happening, which I observed for me as Kasim, is that for me, I couldn't be or have a father who told me what I am, and in order to be loved, I had to be a certain way. I could not have conditional love. I had to have unconditional love, which for me, I never felt like I received, which meant that I could never feel secure. And so there, consequently, I don't have what in Bowlby and attachment theory you would classify as secure attachment. I have avoidant, meaning I want love, but when I get love, I pull away. And part of the reason why I do that is because I grew up in a household and I grew up in a family system and in a system where in order to be loved, I had to be dot. In order to be accepted, I had to be dot. I couldn't be accepted as Kasim as I am, and which is why, consequently, I lied a lot when I was growing up. I lied about the alcohol. I lied about the stealing. I lied about eating pork. I lied about what kind of lifestyle, having sex with boys and girls. I lied about a lot, pretty much everything, because I felt like I couldn't be who I wanted to be. Let me just reflect on this a bit further. So if I grew up in a household where I was secure, when you grow up in a household that's secure, it means that there is a foundation that is laid, but you can explore. And the way that I think about this is to think about children. Sometimes when I'm in like Tesco's or I'm in like a shopping center, I'll watch children walk with their parents and then they'll see something like a toy or something, run off and go and get the toy, but in the background they're looking, as they keep running, they're looking backwards to see if their parent is there. And the meaning that the child knows that as long as the parent is there, they can go and explore, they can go and look for stuff as long as the parent is still in view. And for me, what I learned about myself as Kasim is that I've developed such an attachment that I can run off without having to look backwards. I've almost detached from my parents in such a way that and let me go deeper now. I haven't spoken, I don't know if I've said to you guys before, but I haven't spoken to my family in some, 2-3 years. And whilst I understand how it will feel for them to not see their child or for my siblings not to see me, I do not feel guilty about it, because I am not doing this to hurt them deliberately. I am doing this to be who I want to be. And consequently, I know that some people, they've got to talk. Sometimes I see friends of mine who will be talking to their family pretty much throughout the day. They'll be texting their family. They'll be talking to their spouse. They'll be messaging their spouse. Like all the time. Whereas I can literally go 2 or 3 days without speaking to somebody or family or anyone, and it would be as if we never stopped speaking, right? And what I've observed about myself is that a lot of people are not like that. A lot of people need, in order to have that connection and to have that intimacy, they've got to constantly keep it really close. Whereas for me, I've come to realize that I don't have to have that intimacy all the time. I don't have to keep it there. As long as the connection is there, I can keep going and not have to see somebody every single minute. So one of the things, as I was saying earlier on, is if you're different or not. Because if you're different in a family, one of the things that can end up happening is that you can end up being segregated. You can end up being abandoned. You can end up being cast out, which is why I think, this is a theory now, this is not fact, which is why I think that so many kids either go to idolizing and seeing their dad as like godlike, and they can never see their dad ever doing anything wrong, in spite of the fact that they may see their dad doing something wrong, or they go the opposite way and they see flaws in their parents and they say, I don't want to be that. And it's very, very difficult, because if you've grown up in a household where love is conditional and the dad is doing things that you know are not right, you have a choice then to make. Well, people won't feel like they have a choice, but you have to choose. You either have to basically suppress what you're seeing and go into denial and idolize your parent, or you then have to look at reality, and it is very, very, very painful to see a parent and actually look at them and realize that your parent is just human and that they have flaws. It's very difficult to see that, in my opinion. Very, very, very difficult to see a parent. It's very difficult. You know, I've been listening to stories of people who've talked about narcissistic parents, and it's very, very, very difficult to know that your father has abused your mother, or they've abused other family members, or they've abused you, or they don't love you, or they don't care for you. It's very painful to come to that conclusion. Very painful. No child ever wants to experience that. And so I think that's why it's really interesting. The other thing that I wrote down here is that if you are going to be a problematic child, or you're going to be a rogue kid, a rogue monkey, and I think your dad, on a subconscious level or not, is going to teach you whether you're going to be the person in the family who's going to tear the family apart, or is going to bring the family apart. You're going to be the child who's going to be completely different to everybody else, and your dad is going to have to spend his whole life protecting you, or you're going to be the child who is going to have to cast himself about and is going to be embarrassed and ashamed about. So, for example, you might have a child who's very creative, a boy who is very into theater, a boy who is very feminine, a boy who maybe doesn't want to do farming and wants to do acupuncture, or wants to go traveling, or wants to leave a small town, or wants to become atheist when the entire family are all religious. And you then have to, or wants to come out as gay or pansexual or trans, or they would like to start their own business or go to university. And consequently, the father then has a choice between, do I love my child for who they are or how they present, even if everybody else is going to shame me and shame the way in which I brought them up, or do I cast out the child and be embarrassed about them and basically make them feel segregated, not consciously, but unconsciously, so that maybe they might leave, or maybe they might stop doing what they are doing, or maybe they might change who they are and just acquiesce to how I want them to be, or how they can live and present, so that it doesn't bring shame to us and the family. Yeah, I think that's very, very real. I think that, I know your dad doesn't even have to teach you this. You just can know. But also attached to this is, your dad can subconsciously teach you if you are going to be their favorite child, or you're going to be like the scapegoat. Because if you speak to most kids and you say to them, who in your family is your dad's favorite, every child knows. Now, many fathers will say, I don't have a favorite child. Lies. What a load of bollocks. Every parent does have a favorite child. Yeah, they do. And so what will end up happening is that you will notice that some kids pick up that they're not the favorite. Some kids pick up that they're not loved. Some kids pick up, particularly if you have a kid who's very, very sensitive, or who's very, like me, is very aware of how they're seen or how they're observed, or they're having to keep aspects of their personality tamed or contained or caged up. You're going to notice the way people view you. You're going to notice how people react to you. When I was growing up in my household, and I said about this earlier on, I knew I was loved, but I didn't feel like I belonged in my family. And part of the reason why is because, and I know my stepdad didn't do this deliberately, I knew I wasn't my stepdad's child. I knew he had other kids, right? I knew he had other kids. I knew I wasn't his, because it's just subtle things that he would do, subtle things that he would say, subtle things that the way he would treat the children. And so one of the things that I learned without my stepdad having to teach me is that I learned, oh, right, okay, I'm the problematic child. I'm the one who's going to split up the family. I'm the one who's like going to have to be contained, or he's going to have to be like hushed about, or I'm going to be the one who's, you're going to have to explain to people how I am instead of just saying who I am. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. And the last thing that I wrote down here is failure and support. One of the last things that I've observed, and again, guys, this isn't a full list, obviously, of things I've observed. This is just what came off the top of my head as I was reflecting on these over the last couple of days. But I think one of the things that becomes, your dad teaches you, is whether you're going to get support or not, or you're going to be working collaboratively, or you're going to be going through the world by yourself, or whether you can trust people. Because if you grow up with a dad who supports you, who listens to you, who asks you questions, who says to you, what do you think? Or this is what I believe, but what do you believe? Or who says to you, as a family, let's make a decision, or as me and you, that let's make a decision about, instead of me telling you that we're going to go to football, or we're going to go to shopping or whatever, what do you think we should do this weekend? Or let's work on 3 ideas, and let us work, let's play a game, and whoever scissors and pepper rock scissors, and whoever wins gets to choose. When you grow up with a dad like that, it shows you that you can trust people, that you can work in collaboration with people, that other people have value that they can bring to you, and that you can go through the world understanding that it isn't always the black and white, they win and they lose, and someone has to win and someone has to lose, that 2 people can both win at the same time. And I think that when you grow up and you know that you're not going to get support, because whether your dad doesn't have the knowledge, the skills, your father doesn't have the money, your father doesn't have the desire or motivation because they've got an alcoholic problem, they've got a drug issue, they're dealing with their own mental health stuff, it becomes really difficult, right, to actually be who you want to be. It becomes really, really difficult to manifest and feel secure and feel safe psychologically and emotionally, which means that you end up going through the world not really trusting anyone. And that dad relationship is so important when it comes to support. I think it's so difficult to go through the world where you don't have the support of your dad. It's so difficult, man. It's really, really hard work to go through the world and you don't have the support of your dad. Because you're having to make everything up. You're having to make the rules up. You're having to figure everything out yourself. But if you know that someone's in the background is saying to you, come on, we're going to figure this out. Come on, we're going to solve this. Come on, we're going to work collaboratively. Come on, you want to buy a car? Okay, I will give you 20% if you get the 80%. Okay, you do 50-50, I'll do 50-50. Okay, I'm not going to be great, but I will find you somebody. I will work with you until you're at a level where you beat me, and then I'll find you somebody else. And by that time, we would have figured out a way to actually work around it. When you grow up with that sort of a dad, my goodness me, it really changes things, right? But it's very, very, very difficult because the dad has to have done that work for themselves. It's why I say that one of the things that I believe a lot of counselors don't understand is that when you're working with people from like ethnic minorities and marginalized communities, you really have to understand their culture in which they're brought up, because there are levels to this sort of stuff. It's one, you can do all the work that you want on yourself and go to therapy, but then if you have to get certain information from your family about family secrets, about what happened, if you have to ask your dad about what happened to him and his story, but he doesn't want to disclose it, then you're buggered. You can't really do anything about it, because a huge piece of the puzzle is missing that you can't solve or that you can't break. And obviously in those situations, all you can do is have closure and move forward. But there is certainly, and I do believe that there is a conscious collectiveness. There is certain things that get passed down from generation to generation, family secrets. And if you don't know them, I think they're in our DNA, they're in our psyche, we carry them. I do believe that that is true. So those are the things that I wrote down. As I said, there's loads of other things that I haven't touched on. But what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? You know, these are just reflections. I'm not telling anyone what is factual. Who knows what even facts are? So comment below and let me know what your thoughts are. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.